me. Today we have another talk with another expert of intangible cultural heritage, and this talk is dedicated to the Singapore case. For this case, we have the opportunity to have with us Kirk Siang Yeo. Kirk is a great expert of the 2003 convention. He is a member of the UNESCO, of the evaluation body of the UNESCO Convention, and he is the director of the Heritage Research and Assessment of the National Heritage Board in Singapore. He wrote several publications on intangible cultural heritage and the relationship between intangible cultural heritage and traditional craftsmanship in Singapore. So we asked to Kirk to introduce the case of Singapore and to explain in which way this country protect intangible cultural heritage, especially after the 2003 convention. So thank you very much, Kirk, for being part of this project. And I give to you the floor for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pierre Luigi. It's a great honor to be able to share on Singapore's safeguarding practices of the intangible cultural heritage. But first, to start off my presentation, let me just share a little bit about my country. Singapore is a small, densely populated city and country with a multicultural society of about 5.7 million people. And the people are made up of different ethnicities. Some of the main ethnic groups are Chinese, Malay, Indians that came from other countries and settled in the city, as well as we have many other minorities. Singapore is also recognized as one of the most religiously diverse societies in the world. We have 10 official religions and many other religions that can be found in Singapore as well. SCH is very important to Singapore as an urban city. Intangible cultural heritage provides us, the people, with a continuous link between the past, the present, and helps to guide us on the way forward into the future. And because we have many diverse communities all living together in the urban context, a good understanding of intangible cultural heritage helps to encourage cultural understanding between people, and this in turn encourages social cohesion among the people. We have many diverse forms of intangible cultural heritage that can be found. For example, lion dance that's practiced by the traditional Chinese communities, the weddings, the food rituals, and even the cultivation of flowers are part of our intangible cultural heritage. I would also like to share about the organization that I work in, the National Heritage Board. The National Heritage Board is an agency under the Ministry of Culture, Community and Youth, and it was established with an Act of Parliament. It is basically the national agency that oversees all forms of heritage issues, from the preservation of monuments to the safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage, as well as the promotion of heritage awareness in general. I would like to also share the National Heritage Board Act that led to the establishment of the organization, as well as the functions of the board. The functions of the NHB is to explore and present the various forms of heritage and cultures that can be found in Singapore, as well as the region. And we act as the custodian of Singapore's heritage. A major part of our work is also to promote public awareness, appreciation, and understanding of the arts, culture, and heritage. We are basically the one organization to help encourage greater awareness of Singapore and our cultural roots. A major part of our role is also to advise the government, the ministries, and the politicians on matters regarding the national heritage of Singapore. And national heritage would include heritage sites, museums, collections of artifacts, as well as intangible cultural heritage. The powers of the NHB includes powers to collect, preserve and display objects and records and documents as part of our functions, to undertake and sponsor research and investigation, to establish links between museums, universities, and other institutions, and to extend grants, contributions, financial support to any person or organizations that can help to safeguard the heritage of Singapore. Although there is no explicit mention of intangible cultural heritage in the Act, we continue to do the work of safeguarding ICH. And the absence of the mention of ICH is largely because the NHB Act was passed back in 1993, many years before the UNESCO 2003 Convention was in place. But that does not stop us in our work. In the Act, the heritage is defined and interpreted very broadly, and potentially it can include all forms of culture and heritage. That includes historic buildings, archaeology, objects, and different forms of intangible cultural heritage. Besides the National Heritage Board Act, we have a separate act on the preservation of monuments, and that contains legal provisions concerning national monuments, the protection, the legal guidelines on restoration works that are permitted on this historic building. The name suggests it only concerns the national monuments and does not include intangible cultural heritage at the moment. So that this is the current situation of the legal system in Singapore. But like I mentioned, intangible cultural heritage is included as part of our work as we interpret heritage quite broadly in the work of our organization. Now, let me also briefly touch on the challenges of safeguarding ICH to share some context of the work that we do. Singapore being a small city and a nation, we have experienced rapid urbanization, especially in the last few decades of our national development. Today, we face many issues of globalization as a global city, but that also affects the way our cultural practices are carried out. It affects the way, for example, traditional crafts can survive in today's economy. Of course, there's new technology, lifestyle changes that is changing the way people consume information, services, and goods. At the same time, Singapore is a rapidly aging society, and the smaller and limited manpower that we have also creates problems. For example, the lack of transmission. Many young people are not willing to take up some of these traditional trades and traditional jobs, and they prefer other occupations, for example, in the finance sector or other economic sectors. Just to share some examples and pictures to illustrate the rapid urbanization of Singapore. These are pictures from the Marina Bay area and the Central Business District of Singapore, just 15 years apart between 2000 and 2015. And you can see the rise of many new buildings just within the span of 15 years. Here is another example of Rochor Canal, which is a major road junction in Singapore between the years 1979 to 2015. And between the decades, you will see the many buildings in the background, more modern buildings. So these illustrates the rapid urbanization that can impact how traditions and ICH are being carried out. About the lack of transmission, here are two case studies and examples. Mr. Jim Wong, he is one of the last traditional Chinese paper lantern painters in Singapore. And he's been struggling to find a successor, a younger generation that can take over his skills and knowledge. There's also Mr. Henry Ng. He makes traditional lion dance heads, as seen in the picture. But because of the cheap imports and the high labor costs in Singapore, it's very difficult to sustain this trade. And he is the last remaining craftsman of his kind in Singapore. As a city with a very large migrant population and the movement of people between Singapore and other countries, Some people have concerns, for example, new citizens or migrant communities can come in. Of course, they will bring their own cultures, but there are people who are worried about some of these changes. They feel that it's diluting the existing cultures that are in place in Singapore. Questions like this arise, for example, when does a cultural practice actually become kind of a local practice accepted by the people? At the same time, people have been telling us at NHB that they want to keep things authentic in the same way that it's practiced today, in the same way that they remember how it was. But this is against the notion of intangible cultural heritage, because ICH is a living heritage that changes over time, it evolves, it changes, and perhaps some forms of ICH will even disappear in time to come. So this illustrates some of the challenges and the need to continue to build awareness of the notions of ICH as part of our work. To guide our work, we have developed the Singapore Heritage Plan. That is a 5-year action plan to set out broad strategies and initiatives from the years 2018, and today this year is the last year of the 5-year plan. It includes many different aspects of policies and initiatives, including those covering intangible cultural heritage. The plan was developed in consultation with many Singaporeans before it was finalized. So these are just examples that we, us consulting the communities and the people. We held many focus group discussions, reaching out to 700 people. And from there, we gathered some of the ideas and presented them in the form of traveling exhibitions across the island, across the city, and received many different feedback and suggestions from the people. So the plan covers many areas, and these includes 4 main areas. Our cultures is on ICH. It covers the different strategies on ICH. Our places refers to strategies to preserve historic buildings. And there's also our treasures, which touches on artifacts and objects of historical importance, and how we work with our communities to continue to promote and celebrate our heritage. So in the next few slides, I will share more details of the various measures in the Singapore Heritage Plan, the various safeguarding efforts, and this includes the inventorying process, the efforts to promote greater awareness, how do we support our practitioners, as well as partner our communities in the process. So on the inventory, after Singapore ratified the 2003 convention, we launched the inventory, and it has over time grown to include 101 ICH elements. And these elements were identified with the advice, the information provided by the communities. And it was also supported by a nationwide research and survey study that involves researchers going down to the ground, interviewing, identifying and documenting the different forms of ICH. The inventory is updated once a year, and communities are consulted in the updating process. And we also feature personal views, for example, views on experiences of practitioners are featured in the inventory. So each article that we write and include on the inventory contains the history of the practice, the current practices, how it has evolved, a description of the communities involved and their practices. We also try to include photos and video documentations to illustrate how these ICH practices are being carried out today. So the whole inventory is available online, and we follow the 5 domains of ICH as listed in the UNESCO Convention, but we have added a 6th category on food heritage. I think food is very close to the hearts of many people here in Singapore, and where we were consulting them on the development of inventory, many suggested to include the domain of food, and therefore we have done so. So these are just examples of the online inventory. Just let me share 2 examples of elements that can be found in the inventory. The first one is the pilgrimage to Kusu Island, which is on the inventory under social practices, rituals, and festival. Now, Kusu Island is a very small island located off Singapore, and the island and the pilgrimage is much related to various religious practices, as well as the oral traditions that trace the origins of the island and the rituals that can be found there, and how the local legends gave rise to the pilgrimage that still takes place annually. But interestingly, the oral traditions and the annual practice is quite multicultural in nature. Although the prayers are very religious, practiced by the Chinese community, many pilgrims also give thanks to and worship the Malay shrines as a form of respect for others' culture. So this is to us a very interesting cross-cultural influence that can be observed in the annual pilgrimage. Another interesting example of ICH on the inventory is hawker culture in Singapore. Hawker culture is also inscribed on the UNESCO representative list of ICH in December 2020. It's integral part of everyday life in Singapore. Hawker culture, the name hawker comes from street hawking, and it was used to be street food that was sold on the streets, but because of changes in the urban landscape of Singapore, it's become street food stores that are now housed in hawker centers that you can see in the pictures. The ICH involves hawkers who prepare the hawker food, as well as people who will dine in and mingle at hawker centers. And this is an important, interesting aspect of ICH because it helps to bring people of diverse age, groups, gender, and ethnicities together who can gather and interact over food. So this also contributes to social cohesion, which is, like I mentioned earlier in the presentation, a very important aspect when it comes to living in a multicultural urban setting. In terms of promoting awareness, there's a range of programs that we work and support our communities, and this includes exhibitions, public programs, for example, public programs in spaces that you can see in the streets, like the photos on the streets. We also do a lot of educational programs to schools. And the idea of all these programs is to try to reach out to different audience, from young school students to the general public, and to try to promote a deeper understanding of culture and a deeper appreciation of the different forms of intangible cultural heritage that can be found in Singapore. Of course, we also use a lot of social media to promote ICH, and this includes Facebook, Instagram, YouTube videos, and so on. These are just some examples in the pictures. And in the past 2 years, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, there were a lot of travel restrictions, movement restrictions because of COVID, and many of our programs became digital in nature. So despite the restrictions of movement and the difficulties in gathering and practicing our traditions or participating in festivals, we created digital campaigns to try to encourage communities to connect online so that they can continue to understand and be aware. And interestingly enough, we observed that some of the religious related or culture related practices, because of the digital nature of the work, it allows many more people to feel that they are in a safe environment, that they are easy to connect and can ask more questions about it. So there are some benefits to digital interactions as well, especially among the young people who are quite comfortable in using technology and using their phones and the internet to learn and gather about their information. A new program that we introduced in 2020 was the Stewards of Intangible Cultural Heritage Award. This was very much inspired by some of the Living Treasures Awards, for example, in Japan and other parts of Asia. And the award that we have helps to recognize our practitioners as well as organizations for their dedication and their work in transmitting intangible cultural heritage to the next generation of practitioners, as well as to the wider community. So through the award, we hope that we can profile and encourage more people to value the practice and to respect these practitioners of intangible cultural heritage. With the award comes a $20,000 grant, and the award recipients can use this grant money to support some of their efforts to safeguard their ICH. For example, some of the recipients have used the grant to do documentation efforts. Others have used it to run a series of workshops to train younger people in their skills. Others have created videos, especially during COVID, to try to continue to reach out to their audience and their consumers as well. A new program that we just launched earlier this year is the Craft X Design program. Through this program, we wanted to pair craft practitioners with designers, design studios, and the pair can then help to create new products that are inspired, new products, contemporary products that are inspired by traditional crafts and heritage. And we hope that the program will raise awareness and appreciation of our local crafts and local craftsmen. And it's also a way for us to explore how traditional crafts and traditional products, how can they be revitalized, reimagined, so that they can continue to be sustained. And they can be commercially viable as well. So these are kind of pictures that show the practitioners. Mr. Jim Wong, who I mentioned earlier in the presentation, the last lantern maker, we pair him up with two young designers so they can reimagine what a traditional lantern could look like. For example, using traditional crafting methods, they continue to make perhaps a more contemporary lantern that is suitable in households today. And we also have this weaver, traditional weaver, this Malay lady, and he's working with a designer to see how the weaving techniques can be incorporated into furniture design and the making of furniture, for example. So these are just some ways that we're experimenting to try to make our ICH relevant and also appealing to our younger generation. A new grant scheme that we introduced in 2021 during the COVID pandemic was the Organizational Transformation Grant. This grant provides $40,000 to the practitioners and businesses to help them to transform their practices, to evolve with the times, to evolve and adapt to economic conditions. Many of them are affected by changing consumer preferences, for example, and also finding it hard to compete with cheap imports. So the grant can be used for them to find new ways of producing traditional crafts, experimenting with new designs. They can also be used to help support their documentation work. For example, some of them have used the grant to do 3D kind of documentation of the craft wood carving techniques and the craft products as well. So these are some of the work and the financial assistance that we provide to our practitioners. Besides financial support and grants, we also work very closely with communities to support some of their other projects. For example, communities, individuals, or NGOs who are running events, publications, exhibitions of their own are also supported through the Heritage Project grants. We also work with our universities and NGOs to conduct research and field work through the Heritage Research grants. So, for example, the picture at the bottom of the slide is a picture of the Nine Emperor Gods Festival, when the university and the students there conducted a very detailed research and documentation work on the rituals, the practices, and the experiences of the communities and the worship that they carry out at the temple premises. When we design and work on exhibitions and programs, we also try to partner our communities. These are two case studies that I would like to share. In the Indian Heritage Center in Singapore, this is a center that focuses on the cultures of the migrants who have came from India in the last 50 to 100 years, and they have settled and adapted to life in Singapore. In the Chiti Malacca exhibition that they did, many of the information, personal accounts, and even artifacts and personal items were contributed by the community members themselves. So, for example, recipes of traditional food recipes, traditional um, garments, headwear were featured and donated by members of the communities themselves. And also, even their accounts, personal accounts, experiences were documented presented in the exhibition in the form of photos and video documentaries as well. Another gallery that we work with is the Kreta Ayer Community Gallery. This particular gallery focuses on the migrant Chinese who have settled in Singapore and brought their cultures from China to Singapore and adapted here. And so the gallery features many kind of contributions as well, and involve the communities in the participation and designing of the programs that reach out to the public. So in the picture, you see some of the Chinese opera gowns, and these were also provided by members of the community. So these are efforts that we've implemented during the first 5 years of the Heritage Plan. And because it's coming to an end in 2022, we're now in the process of developing the next 5 years of the plan from 2023 to 2027. And we're engaging many members of the public, NGOs, and practitioners as well to work with them to shape the future 5-year plan. So in summary, I'd like to just highlight a few key points in my presentation. As mentioned, in Singapore, we experience rapid urbanization, and this accelerated rate of change has an impact on how our ICH is carried out. ICH that used to be from a rural environment is now practiced in the urban context, and the practices and the rituals have changed. As a city, we also experience inflow and movement of people from different countries to Singapore. And that also poses some challenge in our continual transmission of ICH. But I believe some of these trends that I've described is also prevalent in many global cities that we see today that still have rich intangible cultural heritage, but the fast pace of change of cities makes it very difficult sometimes to continue the transmission of ICH. But at the same time, cities are interesting because they provide exchange of commerce, trade. It encourages the movement of people, the flow of ideas and cultures, and these can lead to the evolution and sometimes the fusion of cultures that can come about as experience and witness in Singapore. ICH can also encourage social interaction, greater cultural understanding among diverse groups or communities that live in cities, and therefore ICH plays this very important role to bring people together. And there are many opportunities that we need to work with the communities, individuals, and experts because they hold a lot of the knowledge, the traditions, and it's important to involve them and to work together between the people, the government agencies, as well as the researchers to find a way forward in our safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage. And with that, I end my presentation and thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kirk. As you have seen, the case of Singapore is really very interesting. A small country, geographically speaking, but very rich in different cultural heritage due to its multicultural dimension. A country where participation in decision-making process is the most qualifying element, in my opinion. So we thank Kirk for this opportunity to learn about measures and instruments to safeguard intangible cultural heritage in Singapore. And we will see on the next talk. Thank you very much, Kirk. See you soon.